Support for WBFO and What's Next comes from our members and from Health Foundation for Western and Central New York, where racial and socioeconomic health equity are prioritized. Learn more about building healthier neighborhoods at hfwcny.org.
From Buffalo Toronto Public Media, this is What's Next, an hour dedicated to amplifying the voices of marginalized and underrepresented communities across Western New York and Southern Ontario.
We cannot erase, we cannot reform, we cannot make things better if we're uncomfortable having tough conversations, if we're uncomfortable talking about race.
What's Next carries forward our mission to engage in meaningful conversations about race, equity, and the shared concerns that deeply affect Buffalo's East Side and beyond.
Don't stop. Make those families part of your life. Their lives are part of yours. Don't stop.
Together, we dive into the real issues, striving for understanding, connection, and change.
In the suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
Welcome to WBFO's What's Next? I'm Naila Ansari Carbonell-Cotillo, and today we're diving into a topic that affects the very heart of Buffalo, our arts and culture community. I'm here with Maria Ta and Brian Brown. Welcome.
Hey, Naila.
Hey. I feel like I'm here with family. My Ujima family's here.
Always.
Always.
Very
so
chill combo.
Yes, for sure. So I know all about you all, but can you go around? I know you all do a ton for our community in the arts and culture, so I would not be doing you any service just by reading a bio. So I'm going to start with Maria, and then I'll go to Brian to share all about who you are, and we'll dive into some strong topics today.
Yeah.
Sure. My name is Maria Many Hats Ta. Today, my hat is as the founder and principal of the Ta Collective, which is my consulting agency working with arts and cultural businesses and organizations. I'm also a founding member of Frontline Arts Buffalo, which I know we'll be talking about today. I still act from time to time, so you might see me on a stage or two in Buffalo, and I am Brian Brown's best friend.
Yes.
Very much so. Hey everybody, my name is Brian Brown. I'm the managing director at Ujima Company, Inc., or Ujima Theater Company as everybody calls it. You may have seen me on stage. Most people know me as an actor and a singer before managing director. A lot of people usually ask me all the time what I do during my daytime hours, and I'm like, at the theater still. In the office as the managing director. And they're like, oh my God, so that was you that I talked to. I'm like, yes, it was.
Brian is always at the theater.
Oh, always.
Period, the end.
Always. People ask me, what do you do in your spare time? At the theater as an actor. And they're like, well, what do you do during the daytime? Like, what's your daytime job? I'm like, paying the bills at the theater. Doing administrative work. So.
Well, speaking of the theater, we kind of had some theatrics over the last few weeks in terms of funding. So the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, was meant to support our city's recovery from the devastating impacts of the pandemic. A lot of promises were made to organizations like Ujima and others that have gone unfulfilled, leaving all of us to wonder what's happening with the soul of the city, particularly with our arts and culture. So can we talk a little bit about ARPA, and can you explain to our listeners exactly what ARPA is and what it was for?
Sure. I'll let Maria go first. So ARPA funds we were going for with Frontline Arts Buffalo. So this was a little bit before my time. I have the details closer to these recent events, but it supersedes me. So
Yeah, our ARPA funds kind of came into Ujima's picture through Frontline Arts Buffalo, of which I am a founding member with several other organizations. Lorna C. Hill at the time, along with myself, we were part of a collective called the Crossroads Coalition. And through that work, we have been trying to advocate for a systems-based approach to solving the issue of how arts and culture exists in Buffalo and how we continue to exist, and the fact that so many of us are always struggling to survive and figuring out how to pay the bills and how to make sure that our theater doors and our program doors and our gallery doors can stay open. So when the announcement that ARPA funding from the federal government was coming to the city of Buffalo, we saw this as an opportunity to advocate for ourselves, to have the meetings that we needed to have to say that not only should arts and culture receive funding from this pool of money, but that frontline arts and cultural communities needed to really be focused on, because we're talking about funds that were supposed to help us post-pandemic. The pandemic really obliterated a lot of different sectors, and we were there to advocate for the fact that frontline arts and cultural organizations and businesses not only provided art, but we pivoted. We became social service centers. We became places where people could receive additional information on where they themselves could receive PPP funding and how they can come back from the pandemic. So we saw this as an opportunity for the city of Buffalo to not only recognize the work that frontline arts and cultural organizations have been doing, but to really invest in how we come back from the pandemic. I think there are many of us who are not here anymore as organizations, as artists, as collectives. We just could not make it through the pandemic. And this was an opportunity to be able to say, not only do we care about you guys, but we want to make sure that you have a future. So part of that ARPA funding was creating this Frontline Arts Sustainability Fund, an opportunity for everybody who define themselves as a frontline arts organization or business to be able to apply for that funding and receive it. So that's what we were walking into.
And initially it was $2 million that were supposed to kind of be shared with this frontline arts organization, which there's a lot of organizations. I think people were kind of a little misled by some of the articles that came out that it was just supposed to be just for Ujima. This affects a lot of different culturals. So can you talk a little bit about that, Brian?
Sure. So Frontline Arts Buffalo right now consists of Squeaky Wheel, Locust Street Art, El Museo, and Buffalo Arts Studio. So when they announced, so we went through a process of, once they announced this money, that we were like, okay, we're going to put together a MOU and really explain why we were advocating for this money, what this money was going to be used for. And that went to the city. They said, okay. So we had an initial interview with a set amount of people from the diversity office, who in which throughout the rest of this process were not the same people that we talked to. So keep that in mind when we talk about some of the issues that we encountered. But we spoke to them. A few of us from the other organizations really had a plan, went in solid and said, as a united front, this is what we're doing. Ujima was going to be the pass-through, so the money had to come to a 501c3, and we would be the pass-through and disperse the money to the other organizations, with us taking on the administrative business. So that was in 2023. So then we started the process in January of 2024. So similar to if anybody in Buffalo has had to get money or funding from Erie County, it's sort of the same process and contract like the Erie County cultural funding. You have a contract that you have to sign. You have different documents and pieces that show that you are a functioning 501c3. So what are you going to do with the money? You have to come up with a budget, a scope of work, and KPIs, key performance indicators, as well as proof of insurance and other things that just make sure that you are liable to handle this money. So we started that process at that time in January, this last January. That's when some of the people in the Brown administration in City Hall started to change. So that shift in hands started off shaky in this process already. So I met with them. We started the process. Throughout this process, it was me and Maria, talking as managing director. I have to take on the brunt work of, making sure that the funds get out. I'm in all those conversations. So we were really working together to make sure that our scope of work was clean, cut, concise. Our budget was clear. Our KPI was clear. So we started that process, and for months from January to June, each time we gave them a requirement or a piece of information, they came back with something else that we needed to revise or make clearer or, take out of or omit. And the communication was very, very all over the place. First, it was a direct officer in the chief, the diversity office. So at a certain point, we were just speaking to their administrative assistant. So it was hard to get some of the answers, some of the questions heard. So we really were staying on track. Now, at no point did they say that there was a deadline. They, kind of alluded to it, like, the mayor is trying to push this through, and get it in front of the Common Council so, the funds could be dispersed. There was no real, deadline or, we have to have all the paperwork in by a certain point. It was very fluid. And then from June to maybe September, there was a gap and we heard nothing. Now, to us, this isn't unexpected because, it's summer
break.
Summer break. Sometimes the city, we wouldn't hear back from the city for months at a time. So in that process between January and June, we would send something in April and we wouldn't hear anything until top of May. We would send something at the top of May. We wouldn't hear anything for another 3 weeks. So this wasn't out of the ordinary to say, okay, we didn't hear anything, but we're just waiting. And same in the process when they had first announced the funds in 2023. When we had that initial meeting in 2023 in the fall, they had announced the funding in March of the year before. So this predates, a lot of what is going on now, where all that crunch time and where you see me on the news a lot and Maria and Ujima officially having a press conference about it. That's what happens between September and December. We got word from someone in City Hall that we were going to lose the funding because we had paperwork that wasn't finished. And I instantly emailed Maria and I'm like, okay, what? Let's go back and look in all of our correspondence to see, is there anything missing? Did we miss anything? Is there anything that we didn't understand? And I'm like, no. So I told this person, hey, can you go back and whoever you talk to, up in City Hall, can you just give us some information, please? He goes and he comes back and he says, oh, well, it seems that they misspoke and you guys are fine. You're in good shape. There's just a couple more documents that they need from you. And I'm like, okay, fine. So this now is October, I think, because I don't think we had a conversation with them and they wanted us to redo our scope of work, saying that, we couldn't basically be a pass-through. And it's like, well, we've been saying this since we had the MOU and when we sat down in front of that group of people that no longer are here or might be there because we don't see them. But that's the whole point of the contract that we were trying to sign. Also, the city is making the guidelines and the criteria, so there shouldn't be any problem when also the fund is called the Frontline Arts Community Fund, I think it was called, if you're looking at that Amendment 6 that the Common Council was voting on. So it was like, what? I'm not sure where the disconnect is, where the misunderstanding is in what we're trying to do here. And also specifically, that's what sets our funding different or to the side from any of the other organizations who are on that list that came out that said that they had gotten funding or they had got their contract signed. It was with a single organization. Because we were a pass-through, ours was a bit different. So the language had to be a certain way in the scope of work. So I don't know if you want me to keep going or I'll chime in whenever, Maria. So that's October. We have some time and now we're getting close to the holidays. So I know it's going to get even more, slowed down process. So we are maybe a few days away, maybe a week away from when we officially knew that we weren't getting the funding. They emailed us on a Monday and said, hey, we need this information by noon tomorrow. Now, at this point, we are going through an audit at Ujima. So my head is in 20 different places.
Right, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. We just closed the show. So there, I'm like, okay, I need to focus on this. So, I'm trying to rally the troops and say, okay, these are the pieces that we need. Maria's on stage at this time. So I'm like, Maria, can you please, bust this out really quick?
Yeah.
Over, in the middle of the night, Maria, read, what was it, our scope of work at that time?
Yeah, I was redoing the scope of work, giving them a new budget. We had to go through our own contract. Now, mind you, I've been doing federal, state level, local level government contracts for close to a decade now in terms of funding. I have never written my own contract before. And this is one where we are now having to go through and write the language that was taken from our original RFP submission and putting it into the contract form that they wanted. So I figured maybe the city of Buffalo, this is like their first time doing it. We'll just try it out and do it for them. But it started to feel like, this is someone else's job to be doing based off of what we've submitted. And maybe we need to change what we submitted instead of changing the actual contract language. But it was a lot of just playing around with language so that the legal department could pass it. And I'm literally doing this in between shows. I'm on stage, coming off stage. Now I have finished my matinee. I'm going to type up some stuff, and then I have to be back on for my late afternoon performance. So it's craziness, honestly, because it wasn't just Ujima that was going to lose funding. We understood that we took on the brunt of the administrative responsibility because out of all of the organizations, we had the most capacity to do so. That's how we've always done work. Frontline Arts Buffalo is built on that collective model of if you can't do it, that doesn't mean that everybody else should lose out or that you aren't able to receive any of the funding because you literally have 1.5 staff people, whatever the case may be. So we understood that as that's our burden, that's our responsibility. We didn't want to lose out on the funding because of some kind of negligent behavior on our part. But the more and more we poured into it and looked at it and reviewed it, it was hard to understand where we dropped the ball as an organization. And it became the question of why weren't we given the information that we needed to have ahead of time? We could have got all of those revisions done whenever they needed us to do it. But once we got closer and closer to that December deadline that was happening, it was like 24-hour turnaround, 24-hour turnaround, 24-hour turnaround. And we did it. I don't think we missed a single deadline that they asked us for.
No, we didn't. The Tuesday before the Monday and before really this got to the Common Council, like I said, they had asked us to have this, the scope of work and redo the budget. Now, throughout this process, I had been asking them, please, can I please talk to whoever is in charge, whoever is on the legal team that says that our language isn't correct, or we need to, massage the language a little bit, that the budget wasn't correct, or like the KPI wasn't correct. There was a point that at this point, all three of our like major documents had an issue. And it's like, well, we started this in January. It's practically been the same thing since January. We're just changing, or we're giving you more numbers. We're giving you more zip codes that this funding will supplement and impact. So I call Maria, we get that document. I finally get a chance to be on Zoom with them at 11 a.m. Now, half of them couldn't make it. I meet with the two people from the legal team and another office, and they kind of try to walk me through it, but they don't have the answers. And I'm trying to, ask these questions like, okay, what can we do right now in this moment? They asked me some questions. I was like, I really need my partner in this. I need Maria, but she's on stage. Can I, have more time after the noon deadline? She's off stage at 1 o'clock. I can have it to you by 2. They're like, no, the Common Council meeting is at 2 o'clock. So you either give us this document or that's it. I'm like, okay. So I call everybody in Frontline Arts and I'm like, hey, can you just explain to me a little bit more? They want more detail in the budget and what we're using this money for, even though we've said it a million times. So I get that through. I get it to them at 12:30. I'm like, sorry, it's a little bit late. I had to do some more pulling around. So they email me back and they say, fine. There might be a few more things that we have to change and touch, but we think that the acting mayor, Mayor Scanlon, can push this through to the Common Council, and you guys are fine. So I'm like, done. I talked to Maria. We got that through. So the rest of the week, we're easy sailing. That next Monday, I get a call from the chief diversity officer or whoever in that office, and he tells me that we have now run out of time to change any of the documents. Now, at this point, it's like, well, why have we run out of time? What's the deadline?
Right. I've been going through this process for months at this point.
Yeah, we've been doing this for 2 years now, almost. Like, why the deadline now? And he's like, no, we have to report to the federal government by December 31st what we're using this money for or has to be dispersed. I'm like, okay, well, it's like December 12th. So that kind of raised a red flag in my head of like, okay, well, if y'all have until December 31st, then we keep working at this until, we have it going. Now, at that point, he didn't give me December 31st. It just said that they had to report. So, at that point, I didn't really ask a whole lot of questions of, in my head, I'm just swirling of like, what? Like, we've done all this work and now we're not getting the funding. So there's a part of me that is fuming because Maria and I meet every 2 weeks. And even in between, we were talking about, this contract, this funding, all of our pieces. Also to note, one of the very random requests, they want us to have auto insurance. And I'm like, well, as a theater company, you might have, a van or something like that, or a truck that you're, putting, props and pieces in, but we don't have a car. We don't have auto insurance or, auto liability. So we were like, well, why would we take out a policy for auto insurance if we don't have a car? And they're like, you just need to have it.
So we took it out.
We took
an auto insurance policy out.
In order to fulfill what they're asking.
In order to fulfill what they were asking.
Guess how we're going to pay for it? Not with ARPA funds, because we lost that.
So now you're stuck with the bill.
Now we're stuck with the bill of having...
For your insurance policy.
Correct.
For a car.
That doesn't exist.
Truck.
Yep.
Correct.
Van that does not exist.
Correct. Hopefully, in talking to our... insurance claim, our insurance rep, that we can get that off. But, I also explained to them, when I explained this to them, they also asked me the question. They were like, are you sure you want to take out auto insurance? Like, you've never had that before.
Yeah.
Or we've never run into this. Again, like the process in Erie County. So I was like, yes, I guess. And then there was another piece. They wanted us to have umbrella liability insurance, and they were like, you really don't need that. So I was like, okay, well, maybe we hold off on that for now, and then when I figure out that we really need it, we'll take it. But yeah, that's where that happened. So then immediately that next day, Frontline Arts Buffalo, we go down to the Common Council, and we go down to the Common Council meeting, and we speak like we're losing this funding and have no idea why. Now, the week previously, when we had submitted all of this information, it never made it to the Common Council.
So they never saw anything that you needed to have that quick turnaround deadline.
They never saw any of it. So we're talking to the Common Council, and they're like,
what are you talking about?
So they're totally in the dark right now.
They're totally in the dark. They have no idea what's going on. So we're sitting in front of them, and they're like, oh, wow, this is terrible. Like, what can we do to help you? And I'm like, well, tell them to give us the money. Tell them to give us the money and look at the documents that we've given them and, figure it out, what are the next steps? So again, at this point, we figure out that the deadline is December 31st. So now we're asking questions. We're like, okay, if we're not getting this funding and if the money is, has to be reported on the 31st, then why weren't we given that same grace? Or in some of the revisions, El Museo, who is a part of Frontline Arts Buffalo, also applied, because we all at a certain point were just like, whoever can apply to try and get the money, we'll figure it out. So El Museo had to go through this process as well. But again, they were a single organization. So somebody from the office had said, oh, well, El Museo had a few of the same similar issues. Why don't you talk to them? And I'm like, well, if I didn't know El Museo, why would I go and talk to another organization about their contract and their process with you? I should just be talking to you, correct? Because that makes sense. Like, you talk to the people who are actually going to be going through and processing your contract, not a organization. I mean, thank God we know them, but so I asked them the process, and they're like, yeah, was getting the same runaround, the same, had to fix your budget, had to fix your scope of work, had to fix your KPIs. This isn't clear enough. Now you've made it too complicated. We can't understand it. So I'm like, oh gosh. So I think at this point is when we decided to have the press conference.
Yeah, we decided on the press conference because the day after we met with the council during their finance committee meeting, the day after was when the Buffalo News article came out.
Yes.
And that is when the mayor announced that everybody's getting funding except for Ujima.
Oh, and we're going to get into that because I have to take a break because this is, I feel like I'm in like a soap opera right now. This is our city, right? This is like actually happening. So when we come back, we're going to get into that press conference. We're going to get into the council. We're going to get into where we are right now with these ARPA funds. And we're really going to get into arts advocacy because I think it's important for folks to know what this money was intended for and why it's important for our organizations to get funded. We'll be right back with What's Next.
Everyone can leave a gift to Buffalo Toronto Public Media through their will. It's an inspired way to support an organization that has enriched your life and that of others in your community. To learn more, contact me, Lisa Latrovato, at 716-845-7031.
We at Buffalo Toronto Public Media take pride in bringing you your favorite national programs like Fresh Air, All Things Considered, and Morning Edition. But what makes WBFO so special are its local programs, learning together about how government works in bite-sized pieces on Compact Civics with host Corey McCants.
Here's a quick guide on polling locations. A polling place is where you cast your ballot during elections. In America, the term polling place refers to the building, while polling station refers to the specific room or area where voting happens.
And diving into pop culture and local happenings on Group Chat with host Bentley and a revolving panel of friends in the know.
I really miss having to actually wait to tune in for a show and be there at the certain time. Like having to run home and like turn on the TV at a certain time to like watch your show.
Like more national unity then too. Like we were all tuned in.
Everybody is watching at the same time and you can like call and
Ever
say, did you
since
see what
streaming,
happened?
it's just gone downhill.
This is public media.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app and we'll work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
Welcome back. I'm Naila Ansari on WBFO's What's Next, and I'm joined here with Maria Todd and Brian Brown, and we have been talking everything ARPA, which are the American Rescue Funds that were supposed to go to various arts and cultural institutions that did not get there. So we just left off with the press conference. Ujima and Frontline Arts, we had to do a press conference in order to be heard because there was basically a headline that said everyone's getting money except for Ujima.
Yes. And we had to respond to it because, again, especially Maria and I, because we're like, whoa, wait a minute. Acting Mayor Scanlon has said in Buffalo News that we did not do our due justice and
it's a paperwork
issue, and that's why we weren't getting the funding. I was like, oh, and it's definitely not that, because if it was just something that we needed to give you, we could have gave it to you right now and then problem solved. So even in that, it was like, well, we have to explain this injustice that's happening now because there's no reason why we shouldn't be getting the funding. So after that,
and I think that Acting Mayor Scanlon didn't understand the gravity of making that statement in a community like Buffalo. We are already small as is. There's only so much arts and cultural funding as is. As soon as you put the word Ujima and bad paperwork together And that's all over the internet, and that can be searchable for anybody. What makes any funder want to continue to fund you if you had bad paperwork and you were this sole organization that couldn't do their paperwork and now you have lost your funding? So for us, it was a matter of future longevity for the organization that we had to say something. It's not just because we know what the facts are. It's the fact that now we have to defend ourselves in front of the public and say, that's not the story. They're trying to spin it one way or another, and we happen to be the scapegoat of it. But we did our job. You can't place the blame on us, and we have the receipts for it. We have every single email. We have every single communication point. We have every single revision that we've sent in. Every time we've re-revised and gone back and did an original draft and all of that stuff. We have all of that. The question is, does the city have all of that? Because we don't know. We've been working with 4 or 5 different people from the beginning of the entire process. There was no clarity. There was no transparency. And then finally, when the rubber hits the road, we, Ujima, are left holding the bag. Now it's our problem. Now it's our fault. Even though the city didn't do anything beforehand to prep us ahead of time for a year in advance after announcing that fund, it seemed to us very quickly, and I had spoken to Brian about this earlier, several months earlier, we're getting the runaround. Yeah. We are getting the runaround, because I felt like I was having multiple deja vu moments when he would send me an email and say, hey, the city needs us to revise the budget. I was like, wait, didn't we just revise the budget? They need us to revise it again? Hold on, let me read the email and just check and make sure that's what. Oh, no, they do. They need us to revise it. Okay, we'll revise it. And then a couple months later, hey, we need a revised budget. Wait a second. Didn't we already do this?
Wait, how many revisions do we need?
And then if it is, in fact, a need for revising, why can't we get whatever you want ultimately at the end point from the beginning?
Yeah.
It sounds like you're making it up as you go along. And now we're trying to cover the tracks of what, like the fact that we didn't know how the money was going to be dispersed, how the contracting needed to happen back in January. Maybe you needed to take some time as a unit, as an administration, as whoever it be that controls the ARPA funds, sit down and take a couple months and figure it out first and then tell us, because it's our time and resources that are impacted, and we're already under-resourced.
And the press conference seemed like it was a necessity, because you are talking about grants, you're talking about funders, you're talking about people. You don't want your name to be out there that you didn't do what you were supposed to do.
Absolutely.
And also there's a big gap in the sense of there was initially $331 million, around $300 million that was initially given to the city for the ARPA funds. And then there's this $19 million that everyone's now trying to figure out
what to do with.
Where's this money going?
Yeah. Which is where you start to connect the dots and put the pieces together of, okay, now I see why we're getting the runaround. Now I see why this is such. I don't know why they chose us to be the ones, holding the empty bag. But of course, when we did the press conferences, like, you see this whole list of organizations who are getting the funding, who went through their process. I'm not even sure how they went through their process, if it was easy for them, if they experienced the same issues. We know El Museo did. Later, we found out that some of the organizations that had signed their contract didn't even get their money. So African American Culture Center, they didn't receive their funding. They were supposed to be getting $1 million. And that came out towards the end of the year because the Common Council, I think the Common Council had 2 more emergency meetings after our press conference, where that came out that African American Culture Center, Torn Space, and another organization just hadn't received the funding at all. So outside of the issues that we were having, we found out at the Common Council meetings that nobody really had any idea where the money was, how much money was left, how much money had been dispersed, whose contract was officially finished. At the Finance Committee meeting, this is where the Common Council really is fired up now, because they're saying, well, we have all these organizations, some organizations in our districts that are affected by this, and especially Ujima, who has been a staple since 1978. What is going on with them and why? So we're trying to give them all of the information. We set a timeline of when exactly did we talk to someone from the offices? When did we give them new paperwork? When did we revise another item? When did we not hear anything? Went through the whole timeline from January to December and gave it to the Common Council, and their mouth was just open, agape. Like, are you serious? And And then you see that amendment number 6 come out that is now put on the table for the Common Council to vote on. And you see Frontline Arts Community Fund up there with all of the other organizations and all of the other projects that weren't getting funded. And then you say, oh, okay, well, it's because the city has a deficit and they need to close that deficit. So they're going to use the money that whoever at this time was on the chopping block gets chopped.
And that was what was voted on, that they were not gonna give these organizations any of that money that was initially promised, which actually was less than the initial.
Correct. So it was originally 2.4.
It was 2.5 million was the initial release of the Frontline Arts Sustainability Fund pot of funding, and then it went down to 750, something like that. It was it's like 15 projects at $250,000 each or something like that, was the original. And then it just kept getting reduced down to where we are now, where there's only a handful of organizations who are going to receive the funding from that.
Yeah. So it was already shaky that we were like, are we going to get this funding? Because starting at 2.5 to then take away $1.95 million is like, okay, well, I don't think any of us are going to see that money and be able to count on, recouping some of the money that we lost. We went all virtual and digital during the pandemic. And we charged maybe $5 for some of the things that we had, some of the offerings, but we didn't see any revenue during the pandemic when we had to close our doors. I mean, we couldn't be in a theater of 135 seats and have 6 feet in between people.
Yeah. And
people who came together couldn't sit together if you came together. So it was hard.
So, and because of COVID, we did lose so many in terms of arts and culture, in terms of funding. So it was money that we needed. And I think people tend to forget that these arts organizations, nonprofits, they are businesses. Right. They have to be able to sustain themselves. Right. They have to be able to financially sustain themselves. And so this money that was promised, it's a little different than a grant that you may think you're going to get or not going to get. Particularly when you in your mind, that's going to happen, particularly to get you out of something like the pandemic that did cost a lot of our organizations money. So this council meeting happens. Everyone is confused. We have another council meeting. There's this vote that goes, okay, we're not going to spend the money. And then now there's this water situation that can we? Yeah. Does anyone know anything?
So again, sitting there, because I went to every council meeting and the finance committee meeting and any other emergency meeting, and the people that had the answers were not there. So you have a brand new whoever's who was just appointed as over finance,
head of finance administration,
head of finance. He's brand new. He had
he's walking into a whole
hands up. I don't know, had been in the position maybe for like a couple weeks. So the Common Council is grilling him, and he's like, I don't know. I need to do some investigation. They also had an audit that happened, but it was an unauthorized audit that really didn't yield any true answers as to the money. They didn't know how much money had accrued in interest. Like I said, they didn't know how much money was sitting in the accounts. Even with the deficit, they didn't know. So I'm sitting there in the Common Council behind them like, oh my goodness. How do we have a city that mismanages the citizens' money so bad? And especially for people that were struggling, that there was $11 million that was supposed to go to people who had bills in arrears. Water bills in arrears. So anybody who had been behind on their bills, this was supposed to catch them up. They were going to be credited, what have you. And the Common Council asks, okay, so what happened to that money? And they're like, oh, we used it for capital projects.
Capital projects. Yeah.
And they're like, okay, well, you didn't spend did you spend all of the money on capital projects? Like, did anybody in arrears see that money? And they're like, oh, we think so. We would have to, go back and check and really look through the paperwork. And it's like, oh.
Yep. So part of the ARPA funds have now been moved to doing the water arrears, which everybody thought was already done.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a lot of one hand paying the other hand, but both hands are the city of Buffalo.
Yeah.
And then you have a new administration that's coming in that's like, I have no idea what's happening. You have a council that's trying to, I mean, for all intents and purposes, these organizations they're also their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you know, not for anything, you have a lot of kids that participate in a lot of programs that really sustain the environments and the communities that we're in. And so now everyone is just trying to figure out what is going on, what is happening with these ARPA funds. And so I think it's interesting that Ujima kind of, you know, I think like Lorna C. Hill would have wanted to take the reins to really ask the questions to make sure that folks get the money or at the very least understand what's happening or what's not happening in our city.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I feel like most people just didn't know. They had no idea. Like they probably didn't even hear about ARPA funds until all of this started kind of bubbling up at the surface, and they're like, oh, it was meant to be given to all of these people and all of these communities, and that's my community, or I recognize that organization, or I have water bills in arrears. And now it's the stark reality that those dollars are already attributed to filling the holes that the city dug itself into over the last few years. There's nothing, truly nothing that we can do about it other than to never get ourselves in this situation again.
So, you know, and especially saying that, you know, it didn't just affect arts organizations or any of the programs in the community. It affected people, single citizens, single residents of the city of Buffalo that the ARPA funds should have helped. So that really felt like a true disservice. And even with the Common Council, because they didn't know, it was okay, you didn't know, but also how did you not know? And some of the conversations that they were having, you know, with the Water Authority and with the Finance Office, they were saying like, going back, that's not what we voted on. That's not what you were supposed to do the funds with. But, you know, they had amendments and things, and it was hard to keep a trail and track on where the money was going. So even to today, now I think Acting Mayor Scanlon is doing a whole investigation. They are really going through each office to see how the money was spent, where it actually went, who got the money that, you know, got contracts, any of these other programs, where are they now? Because even with the money, even with the $200K that we were supposed to get and disperse, it was broken up into 2 years. So,
which is not a lot of money for the amount of organizations that you are supposed to support.
Which I found this out, which was also really crazy. They would give you a certain amount of money, and then you had to report back for you to get the second half of the money. But if you started a program and you started to spend that money, that first half, you can't stop a program in the middle of it, or you can't use all of those funds and wait for more funds when you have to report on it to keep going. So like, say we were in the middle of our season or in the middle of our Dunbar Youth Theater Arts program. When those funds run out, then what are you supposed to do? Just wait for the city to give you the check? And considering how this has happened already, some of those people never saw that money.
Which is extremely unfortunate, to say the least. Yeah. Well, we're going to head into a break. I'm Naila Ansari, Carbonell Cotillo with WBFO's What's Next, and we'll be right back.
This is Jack Cruiser with the scoreboard on WBFO. Listen during Morning Edition and All Things Considered each Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the latest on pro matchups and college rivalries, as well as standout local athletes from Western New York and Southern Ontario. Want more? Listen to a longer version of the scoreboard at WBFO.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email what's next at WBFO.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
Welcome back to WBFO's What's Next. I'm joined by Maria Todd and Brian Brown, and we've been talking about the ARPA funds, where are the funds? Maybe that should be the, since we're talking about headlines, maybe that should be the headlines.
Where are the funds?
Where are the funds at, right?
Yeah.
But one thing I really want to talk about with you all is the importance of giving to the arts in general.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it such a big deal that we did not get those ARPA funds in terms of arts and culture?
It puts a damper on our ability to provide for the community. Most people don't see the arts as an essential part of our well-being in the city. And I can't tell you how many opportunities I've had or how many students we've had that have come through those doors, or how many patrons we've had that have seen or felt something that was coming off that stage at Ujima or from a teaching artist that they said, wow, that changed my life. Wow, that really helped me get through a hard time. That really helped me understand what it means to be in a collective atmosphere, pouring into each other, learning, building skills, just having a place of refuge that you feel comfortable. We're a Black-led company, but we're multicultural. That doesn't mean that it's only exclusive to African Americans, or if your skin color is brown. It's widespread. It's broad. There are so many things that affect everybody, but of course, the frontline arts communities, which usually are made up of, ethnicities that are not on the forefront of who are making the choices in grant making and in foundations and, just money and help at all, that's why it's important. It's really hard to have a thought that our Dunbar Youth Arts program that is free might close because we don't have the funds, or we might not be able to put on 4 productions a year, that we might have to go to 3 or 2 or figure out what other programming we have to cut out because we don't have the funding for something like this to really be able to rebound in having to front some of the money for paying our artists and, hoping that money comes in from a foundation or from a grant. But we're paying these artists, we're paying these teaching artists, we're funding these programs to give back to the community, to have something in the area in Western New York and Buffalo on the West Side that, it's like, what do you do? What do you say when you have to maybe make a pay cut, when you have to say we can't open our doors for, a semester or a summer? So it's hard. It's hard to be in that position to not know what lies in the legacy of an organization that has been consistently overlooked sometimes throughout the course of, since 1978. We're in our 46th season now. So,
and in all honesty, if we're talking real dollars and cents, it is extremely hard to be an arts and cultural organization right now. The funding landscape has completely changed, particularly for our region. I think many of the folks who are listening and who are aware or who work at an arts and cultural organization knows that there are several foundations and funding sources that have shifted away from arts and culture funding. And that's not to say that what they're funding now is not important. We recognize that. We recognize that there are basic needs that the community needs and wants. But the question still exists. Now what? What happens to that hole and that gap in funding that currently exists? How do we fill it as organizations who are already under-resourced, already do not have departments that can go seek additional funding outside of the region? We don't have the staff people to go to conferences and meet other funders who might be on a national scale, who can provide funding for those kinds of holes in our budget. So the opportunity here for folks is, when you're asking yourself, how do I become a solution into this larger problem? We have to start being able to fill those holes in some way. Maybe you are a funder or a foundation, or you have a family fund or a family foundation who has ideas and thoughts about where you want to place that funding. The need is there. And if we're talking about arts and culture as an entire sector, the worst and the first impact are always frontline arts and organizations and cultural organizations. They're the ones that are literally on the front lines. They're the ones that get the funding cut first. They're the ones that have to work 10 times as hard to get any sliver of funding that currently exists because they don't have the people to be able to go out and seek that kind of funding. So we really are trying to think of like systematic ways to solve that problem. It's a huge problem, but in all honesty, if that funding landscape doesn't change, in the next 10 years, we're going to see a major decrease in the number of organizations that exist in Buffalo. And we're a very rich arts and cultural sector.
Right? Oh, yeah. I mean, we brought in over, $300 million last year with the arts and culture. And I think people don't really understand that because when you don't fund the arts and culturals around the city, you also are not funding restaurants that people go to, different parking lots that people are paying. Like it brings funding and money into the city, and so people kind of silo arts and culture as it's like an entertainment kind of a thing, and it's just something that people it's a want, not a need. But it really is a need, particularly when we talk about our children. Yes, we need them to be. The more involved they are, is the less that they're getting in trouble doing other things.
Right. And then if you're just looking at the pandemic, I'm sure everybody who has lived through the pandemic, what did you turn to when you went to the pandemic? You turned to TV, you turned to music, you turned to movies.
DJ Nice.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Those are the things that you turn to because those are the things that give your life color, that actually brings depth to the experience that you have as a human being. And we can't all of a sudden say, wow, we really love and enjoy those things, but it's not a necessity. So now we're going to draw back on that and we're going to focus on these things and good luck.
Or what feels like you're not worth it enough to spend the money on, or you're not worth it enough to make a living off of it. And it's like, well, this is what I know and do. Outside of the people that are on stage or on TV or behind the microphone, you have the people who are facilitating and making sure that happens. So the people who are in administration, the artists who are controlling the board, controlling the sound, controlling the lights, making sure that everything shifts and goes the way that it's supposed to, that you have to fight for.
And I think people forget that arts and culture has a workforce. like artists are workers. They are providing a service through their talents, but it's not like, oh, it's Susie Q's nice little hobby that she does and that's it. Like, we have artists who are fighting tooth and nail to get paid decent wages, and it's difficult being an administrator or a director or somebody who's running a performing space and not having the literal funds in the budget to be able to pay people what they deserve to be paid.
Or even have health insurance. I don't have health insurance as, an administrator, and that's not, anything on our organization, but
it costs a lot of money.
It costs a lot of money to have insurance through your employer. So that was also part of what this funding was going to go to, was for, our staff is growing, and, what does that look like, and especially with sickness and this work that we do works hard on the body. So at a certain point, it's like, oh gosh, I'm hoping that nothing happens, that I have to go to the doctor, that I have to go to, urgent care, or, the next sickness. If you get COVID, like if anybody in our show gets COVID, that puts the show down.
Right.
What do you do?
And that's money that's coming into the organization.
Yeah.
Which I have to say thank you to Charles and Michael back here that are producers that people don't see that are doing
the workers.
These are also the people that we advocate for.
Yes. Well, as we wrap up, I want to make sure people do know how to give you all money, particularly since the ARPA funds have been, taken away. So can you share where folks can donate to Ujima and also Frontline Arts organizations?
Sure. So you can go on our website, www.ujimacoinc.org. That's UJIMACOINC.org/donate. You can also find that donate button right in the right-hand corner on our website. If you don't remember it, it would really help if you became a monthly donor. If you don't want to see it, you don't want to think about it, you can put $10 in there and it'll take it out every month, just like any of the auto pay bills that you have. Or you can be a one-time donor, but everything helps. We are in our year-end campaign still until the end of January, or until the funds really stop trickling in. So that's the best way to really help and support what we do as an organization.
And if you're interested to learn more about Frontline Arts Buffalo, we do have a very easy website. It's called frontlineartsbuffalo.org. We have information on all of our member organizations there, opportunities for you to give directly to those organizations as well. So please be as generous as you can.
Awesome. Well, thank you to our guests, Maria Ta and Brian Brown, for sharing their insights. And thank you to our listeners for tuning into WBFO's What's Next. I'm Naila Ansari Carbonell-Cotillo. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and let's work together to ensure that Buffalo's cultural heartbeat continues and thrives.
Support for WBFO and What's Next comes from our members and from Health Foundation for Western and Central New York, where racial and socioeconomic health equity are prioritized. Learn more about building healthier neighborhoods at hfwcny.org.